If ATC gives you a number to call, should you make that call? We'll find out coming up next. Hi, folks. Welcome to the informational, inspirational, and transparent aviation channel. Today, we're going to answer the question, if ATC gives you a number to call, should you make that call? Well, joining me today is actually Chris Pizzala from Strumer Law, and he's been on the show before. We're going to discuss this. If ATC gives you a number to call, should you make that call? Hey, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Carl.
So one of the things that's interesting about this and some of the other issues with aviation, it all depends, like in our other videos. And by the way, if you want to see more videos, of course, click subscribe down below and click on the bell so you get notified every time we do have another one come out. Interestingly, it's amazing how it really does depend on most things in aviation. So there's no strict rule of thumb. But let's talk about what we should consider. Let's put a scenario together first. So normally what happens is, and this has happened to me, you have air traffic control say, hey, Cessna 12345, I have a number for you to call. Here's the number. Tell me when you're ready to copy. You copy that number down. Now what do you do, Chris?
Hey, Carl. So one of the big questions I get from pilots is, I just got a phone number from air traffic control. Should I call that number? And or do I have to call the number is really the first question. And the answer to that is no. You do not have to call the number. There's no legal obligation. But what the air traffic control is trying to do is have a discussion that is maybe longer than what they'd like to have over the frequency, or discuss something that they don't want to discuss publicly over a radio frequency if there's been an issue or there could potentially be an issue. So you're not required to call. That being said, a lot of folks do like to call.
So okay, let's look at a couple cases here. So if you call air traffic control and you say to them, hey, I'd love to get a tour of the tower, and air traffic control says, hey, copy this number down and give us a call, that's a lot different because that's a friendly type of thing. So yeah, in that case, you want to make communication just like you mentioned here. But if air traffic control says this to you, Cessna 12345, here's a number to call, please call us, there's a possible violation. Now, what do you do if it's that scenario?
So that's the next question is, if there's a possible violation, or maybe they didn't tell you why they're giving you the number, but of course you can assume something's not right. And this is a matter of debate within the industry. Again, it's not legally required, so it's really going to come down to two schools of thought. I'm of the school of thought that you should generally call the phone number and figure out what's going on. And I think that for a couple reasons. First is that many of these calls are not actually anybody in trouble. They're just trying to convey some information or maybe ask a question. Several years ago, I landed at Washington National Airport, DCA, with an airliner, and I made an amazing short approach to the crossing runway, and I turned off, and sure enough, ground control gives us a number. So we called the number, and the controller says, hey, you did nothing wrong here, but next time, roll across the other runway before you turn off. It'll help the flow of our traffic. So all they're really trying to do there is just help us along with improving the traffic flow, and it's just too much of a conversation to have on the radio. If we hadn't called, I know I would have spent the next 2 days wondering what I did wrong and whether or not I'm going to get a letter from the FAA.
So when they give you a number, it's not always a bad thing. So let's talk about that a little bit. I think it's great. I call them all the time. If we have had an issue, it's a good idea to give them a call because you can learn something, and I think that's great. We're going to talk a little bit more about what to do moving forward. And again, we're speaking with Chris Pizzala from Strumer Law. You can find actually their website right here on the screen and also down in the show notes. Everything we talk about is in the show notes, and links to everything we talk about is right there. We talk about some other issues too, so make sure you go check those out on the YouTube channel down below. One of the things that I really think is the meat of this matter is you call them, right? And you give them a call. You don't know what it's about. And on the phone, they say to you, hey, there was a possible violation. And so at that point, you hear those words. Let's not go through the whole conversation yet, but when you hear those words, what do you suggest people to do at that point?
Well, I mean, the first thing to do is listen. Ask them what their concern is. If you have a notepad or an iPad, you can take notes. See if you can figure out where the problem is, and whether or not there even was a problem. A few years ago, a surveying aircraft operating up in New York entered one of the Class Bravo airspaces, and they were doing survey work. They had a transponder code, they had the Class B approval. While they were there, the controllers did a changeover. They changed controllers. The incoming controller forgot to brief the new control, or the outgoing controller forgot to brief the incoming controller about the presence of this survey aircraft. When that controller discovered the aircraft, it thought that it was a mistake. The aircraft was forced to leave the airspace. He received a phone number. And so the pilot, once he landed, he called air traffic control and said, actually, I do have permission. And so the supervisor went back, pulled the recordings, discovered that the airplane had done everything correctly, and called the pilot back and said, sorry, there's no issue here. That was just a misunderstanding on our side. If the pilot hadn't called, the facility might have filed a pilot deviation, and instead of resolving it with a short phone call, it would have had to be resolved through an investigation. And eventually it would have favored the pilot, but it would have taken several weeks and involved one or more FAA offices to resolve something that was done very quickly by phone within 15 minutes.
So most cases, it's good to make that call, but it's important to listen during that phone call. It's also, I think it's important when to stop talking. And I have an example of someone who did that, called and said, hey, listen, I don't think that the other person is going to file a complaint, but they might. So I just want to give you that heads up. And the person I was flying with actually went into this whole diatribe. And honestly, the next day we got a call from the FAA. So in that case, made their case worse when they called. So let's talk a little bit about this. This gets a little more nuanced as far as what we do when we make that phone call. So say during that conversation, again, there may have been a violation, and there may have been. Maybe you really did have a violation. I'm going to use another example later. So what do we do now? If they say, hey, listen, there is that possibility of violation, kind of walk us through what we should do, both from a legal standpoint and also maybe some other suggestions as what we can do as a pilot to save our hide.
Right. So if you have a possible violation, first thing, of course, is listen, get all the information, and make sure to avoid an argument. If you're nice to the controllers, a lot of cases, they actually will not file a violation. If they feel that they've conveyed to you what the problem is and it's been resolved, they may choose not to file. If they do, you're not going to change their mind by arguing with them. So never, ever argue with them. Those lines are recorded. And also, the diatribe is unnecessary. A lengthy explanation of what was going on in the cockpit or your mindset is not going to favor you. You want to be factual. And if you made a mistake, you can be factual about that. I'm going to talk about an occurrence I had, and this is already public, so we can talk about this. And a number of years ago, more than 10 years ago now, I was operating a regional jet as a first officer, and we received an instruction to descend from our present altitude down to 10,000. Once we leveled off at 10,000, the controller called and said, confirm your altitude. We said, we're at 10. The controller says, yeah, you're supposed to be at 11. And okay, first there's that sort of panic mindset. And we asked the controller, do you want us to go back to 11? He says, sure. So we go back to 11. We're at 11,000. A couple controllers later, we land. Sure enough, here's a phone number. We called the facility, and they said, yeah, we actually descended you to 11. And we said, well, did you check the tapes to make sure that's where the error was? And they said, yeah, we checked the tapes. That's as much conversation as we needed to have. We're not going to argue with them. And in that case, they were very polite, and they just said, look, this happened. And they said, we're sorry, but you crossed out of our facility into another facility's airspace. We no longer have a discretion. We're required to file this because the other facility will also be filing. I said, okay, no problem. So again, very cordial phone call. They filed this. We went back and we filed NASA reports through our air carrier system. A lot of air carriers have their own safety reporting, which also doubles into the air safety reports run by NASA. So we went ahead and did that. And about a week later, I get a phone call from an FAA investigator, and he asked me what happened. And I said, we thought we heard 10. We set 10. We descended 10. Turns out it was 11. It was human error. And he says, okay, I talked to the pilot. I talked with the captain. That's the same occurrence he had. And they said, it happens. And so this is your verbal retraining. We're not putting anything in your file, and this matter is resolved. And that was it. That was the whole case. I still put it down on my last job application just to be completely honest. But the reality is, it's not following me. It's not anywhere in my FAA records, and it hasn't hurt my career. And so being open and honest made a very fast resolution to this problem. So if something like this happens, call the number, be polite, be factual, get all the information, file a safety report, and then if you need more guidance, go to, if you're an air carrier, go to your union, or if you're private, go to a resource like an attorney or AOPA's legal plan and get some advice from them on what to do if the FAA does call about it.
So from the private pilot standpoint, I know from the airline standpoint, you kind of have procedures, file the whatever report you need to do, ASAP, whatever they call the airlines. But on the private side, would you recommend that they put in an aviation safety through the aviation safety reporting system, a safety report?
I always recommend that. The aviation safety report, oftentimes referred to as the NASA report, is a report that you make to a safety database. The FAA and the DOT use this to look for trends, to see if maybe there's something that they're doing system-wide that's contributing to events. So they like to encourage these reports, and what that report does is that it helps to encourage some leniency from the authorities if there is an investigation. One of the things I want to point out is that is the sole source reporting rule. If you have a potential violation and you file a safety report and you're the only source of that information, you and maybe the other pilot, the FAA cannot take a legal action against you. So you're never going to shoot yourself in the foot filing that report as long as your mistake was unintentional. Now, there are some rules with it. It has to be unintentional. It has to be non-criminal. If you're running drugs from the Bahamas, it's not going to be covered. So, but if it's something like an altitude deviation or an issue with an approach that maybe you didn't follow the proper lateral path, then that's going to be a case where you do want to file that safety report. It's never going to hurt you. It's free. You can file as many as you want in a year. So there's no reason not to. And in a lot of cases, especially for the air carriers, it has to be done within 24 hours. So don't take your time. Go ahead and get that done.
So, Chris, there's a question that comes in from a lot of listeners is as far as the safety reporting is concerned. So you get that number to call. You call the number and they tell you, by the way, we don't think there's a violation. Don't worry about it. You actually decide that you're not going to file the safety report. But about 2 months later, something happens. You get a letter in the mail that there's an investigation going on from the FAA. What can you do then? This is a couple months later. Is there anything that you can do? Can you file that report 2 months later? I mean, what happens there?
Right. So in most cases with the air carrier programs, the timeline is 24 hours from when you notice the event. So an example would be I operated for an air carrier, again, also a number of years ago, I think about 10 years ago. And we had a plane that managed to fly around the system with no airworthiness certificate for about a week. And the FAA discovers this, and they sent letters of investigation to approximately 48 pilots, including myself. And what we ended up doing is, of course, we all went back and filed safety reports because we weren't on notice that there was a problem until we got the letter in the mail. So I don't want to say it's never too late, but whenever you get notice that there's a problem, that's a good time to go and file that. And also, you can file an aviation safety report anytime you want, even if there's not going to be a pilot deviation. So if you had an event and the controllers say, you know what, we're going to let it go, you can still file that safety report. And actually, that's going to help the safety system quite a bit to have that report and to have that in the database. Because maybe the same event's happening a lot of times and the controllers are letting it go. And so there's no way for the administrators to look at this and say, how do we prevent this from happening again? So it's better to have more safety reports than less. I'm a big believer in the honesty policy of let's report it. Also, a lot of airlines have their own internal reporting systems, not just the safety ones, but they also have operational ones. And I always file a report through that system as well because it goes to a different channel. So for the air carrier I worked for, filing a safety report would go to a safety committee. Filing through the company's internal operations reporting system went straight to the head of safety. And so it got two different groups looking at this saying, hey, maybe we need to change the way we're doing something.
Safety reporting is so important, both at the airlines, ASAP programs, whatever your reporting system is there, and also in our personal flying with the FAA, doing a NASA ASRS report. And by the way, we'll have links below as far as all those reports are concerned. Even some links to the union websites out there as far as ASRS are concerned for those that are interested, and concerned with their career. Um, but going back to the point of if you don't recognize that something happened, is when you recognize it, that's when you should file a report. I will say I've had a lot of experience with this and some of the past work I've done with the union. And one thing that I found in general, just in general, is that the FAA is, fairly lenient on that. If you did not realize something happened, what they normally will call you and they'll say, hey, listen, get a report in within 24 hours. We just need you to do that, period. And you just make sure you file that report. You can get an extension on that if there's some reason that you can't, say you're sick or something like that, and you ask for like a certain number of hours. I don't remember what it is, but everybody has different rules within their reporting program. But let me ask you this question: what if you are incapacitated in some way, and there is an accident or incident? Um, you can't file a report. What happens then? And then finally you get better. When do you have the ability to file that report? That's what I'd like to know.
So that's going to depend on each individual air carrier's program. I will say a lot of air carriers have a basically a flag on the field rule where you can call a phone number and open the report even though you don't have time to complete it. It gets you a date and a time and a report number, and then they give you a certain amount of time to finish it. Beyond that, there's a lot of reasonableness to this. I know that when I've worked with the union and with the safety program in the past, it wasn't uncommon for reports to be a few hours or a few days late, and generally they'll decide if they want to accept that, but generally speaking they would accept that as long as you've made a good faith effort. And obviously if you've been in a hospital or some other place, you're not going to get to that timely. They know that. Also, if you're in the hospital following an aircraft event, there's probably a much bigger investigation going on at that moment. So hopefully you're
Yeah.
okay.
Yes, that's for sure. So in other words, there are times where you can file it late and it'll be fine. But if you think you need to file one, file one. There's different philosophies, both from the career standpoint and also from the personal standpoint, and which type of report to file. Because in airlines world, and in corporate world, there's different methodologies of reporting. We talked about the ASAP program. There's also internal reporting, that type of thing. And then there's, hey, I'm raising my hand. I think there's a safety problem. Let's take a safety timeout. This doesn't necessarily mean we need an ASAP. But then there's from a personal flying, and I'm a big fan of the NASA ASRS report. But going back over some of these things, I think we've kind of gotten this down to, be careful what you say when you call. And one of the most important things is, ask, what's going on. But give us a kind of a review of some of the things that we should do during this whole scenario. So if we do get a call, should we actually call them back? If air traffic control says call this number, should you make the call?
And so with that, I do. I always make the call. I want to know what's going on. The controller friends tell me that 90% of the time they're not going to file a pilot deviation. They just want to talk to you. So it's a good chance to chat with them, learn something new. If there is an issue, it's going to give you a chance to get ahead of it and know exactly what you want to put into your safety report. So you know exactly what it is they're looking at. A few years ago, we had two pilots who got actually got a letter. They didn't get the phone number, and they didn't know what the deviation was. They had two different things they had done that was potentially a deviation, and they would not. The FAA wouldn't tell us, so we ended up having to go in and figure. Actually, I made them file two safety reports, one for each possible occurrence. And then if you need more help from there, or you think there's going to be an ongoing issue, reach out to your union, your attorney, or to AOPA's legal plan and get some help from an attorney or a union representative who's familiar with these matters.
So, Chris, again, thanks for that information. Really appreciate it. Again, if ATC gives you that number to call, should you make that call? Yes, you should. Based on this, we've been talking to Chris Pizzala at Strumer Law. All the links are right here on the screen. Don't forget, if you like the video, click the thumbs up. Also, if you want, subscribe down below, and make sure you hit the bell so you get notified every time there's a new video that comes out. We have a lot of other videos that we'll link to in the show notes below so that you can look at things like, can I fly with a DUI? Well, again, thanks again for being here, Chris Pizzala with Strumer Law. We really appreciate it. My name is Carl Valeri here at Aviation Careers Podcast, and please subscribe to some of our videos here on the Inspirational, Informational, and Transparent Aviation Careers Podcast and channel here on YouTube. We'll talk to you next episode. Safe flying out there.